Welcome back to the animated past, where history comes to life. Before we begin, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss what we uncover next. For 500 years it had no equal, an empire that swallowed continents. Its roads stretched from the deserts of the east to the rain-soaked hills of Britain, and its armies had never met a foe they could not break. And then, slowly, impossibly, it was gone. The year is 476. There was no final battle, no last stand. The most powerful civilization the world had ever known simply faded into history. So how does an empire like that collapse? Not in a single day, and not by a single hand. It was corruption, and the slow poisoning of its own wealth. It was betrayal from within, and the endless pressure of enemies gathering at the gates. And by the time anyone truly understood what was happening, it was already far too late. This is the story of how Rome fell. To understand the loss, you first have to understand the height of it. At its peak, Rome ruled some 60 million people, roughly 1 in every 5 human beings then alive on Earth. The Mediterranean was not a border to be defended. It was a Roman lake, and they called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. Its roads ran for 50,000 miles. Its cities had running water, sewers, heated floors, and grand public baths. A citizen standing in Britain could spend a coin bearing the very same emperor's face as a merchant haggling in the markets of Egypt. To those who lived inside it, Rome felt permanent. It felt eternal. But that was the lie. Because even then, the cracks were already beginning to show. To find where the rot truly set in, we have to travel to the year 235. For the next 50 years, Rome would come closer to destroying itself than any enemy ever managed. Historians call this the crisis of the 3rd century, and the numbers alone are almost difficult to believe. In the space of 50 years, the empire saw roughly 50 emperors rise to power, and most of them were murdered, many by the very soldiers sworn to protect them. The problem was simple, and it was fatal. Whoever controlled the army controlled the throne. So the generals stopped turning their swords outward against Rome's enemies and began turning them inward against one another. Win a single battle, and you could declare yourself emperor and march on the capital. Lose, and your own men would cut you down to make way for the next ambitious commander. One emperor followed another. Some held power for years, others for only a matter of weeks. And while Rome was busy stabbing itself in the back, its borders were quietly beginning to burn. A great plague swept through the cities and killed untold millions. Enemies pressed in from every direction at once. The very machine that had built the world was now tearing itself apart from the inside. Rome survived it, but only barely. And it would never truly be the same again. Now we have to follow the money, because this is the part of the story few people ever talk about, and it may have been the deadliest wound of all. To pay all those soldiers and all those rival emperors, Rome did what desperate governments have always done. It began to cheat. The silver coin, the denarius, had once been very nearly pure. But emperor after emperor began to shave the silver down and mix in cheaper metal, a little less each time, and then a little less again. By the end, that proud silver coin was barely 2% silver. The rest was little more than cheap metal hidden beneath a thin and shining coat. But people are not so easily fooled. Prices soared, and the money itself became almost worthless. In some corners of the empire, Romans stopped trusting coins altogether and returned to simple barter, trading grain for cloth as though 1,000 years of progress had never happened. Trade broke down. Taxes grew crushing. The wealthy retreated behind the walls of their great country estates, while the poor were taxed into the ground. And the middle class, the merchants and small farmers who had always been the beating heart of the economy, were slowly squeezed out of existence. An empire runs on money, and it runs on trust. And Rome, without ever quite realizing it, had destroyed them both. And here the danger deepened, because an empire that cannot pay its way can no longer defend itself. For centuries, The Roman legion had been the most feared fighting force on earth. Citizen soldiers, brutally trained, fighting for the glory of Rome itself. But now, fewer and fewer Romans wished to serve. The pay was poor, and the borders stretched on without end. So Rome struck a bargain that would one day come back to haunt it. It began to hire barbarians, whole tribes of Germanic warriors, brought inside the borders to fight in the empire's name. Consider what that truly meant. The army defending Rome was now filled with the very people Rome had once conquered. They had not grown up saluting the eagle. They fought for a wage and for their own tribes, and their loyalty always carried a price. And one day, inevitably, someone would offer to pay them more. By the year 395, Rome was forced to admit what had long been obvious. It had simply grown too vast to be ruled from a single city. And so the empire was divided in two. A western half, governed from Rome and later from Ravenna, and an eastern half, ruled from a dazzling new capital called Constantinople. Here lies one of the cruelest twists in the whole story. The East was wealthy, blessed with richer trade routes, stronger cities, and walls that could be defended. And it would endure for another 1,000 years. The West was handed the harder task and the weaker hand. Longer borders, poorer provinces, and standing just beyond its frontier, a gathering wave of desperate tribes being driven toward Rome by something more terrifying still. So who were these barbarians that Rome had come to fear? The Visigoths, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths. Tribe after tribe pressed against the empire's frontier. But many of them were not merely attacking. They were fleeing, running from something rising out of the east. The Huns. They were ferocious horsemen who seemed to appear from nowhere, and behind them rode the most feared man of the entire age. His name was Attila, and the Romans called him the Scourge of God. He carved a path of fire across Europe, burning cities, demanding tribute, and forcing emperors to their knees. As the Huns drove entire nations off their ancestral lands, those nations had only one place left to run, straight into the heart of Rome. The dominoes were falling, and every last one of them was falling inward. In the year 410, something happened that the Roman world had long believed to be impossible. A Visigoth king named Alaric had spent years pleading with Rome for land and fair treatment for his people, and year after year, Rome had answered him with lies and delay. So at last, Alaric marched his people to the very gates of Rome itself, and this time, someone opened them. For 3 days, the Visigoths sacked the Eternal City. Homes were plundered, and treasures were carried away into the streets. The city that had conquered the entire world was now being stripped bare by the very people it had once dismissed as savages. It was the first time in 800 years that a foreign enemy had taken Rome. 800 years. The shock of it rippled across the whole empire, and many came to believe that the world itself was ending. It was not the end, not yet. But everyone could feel it now. The invincible empire was bleeding out. And then, in the year 455, the Vandals came and did it all over again, sacking Rome a second time and even more thoroughly than before. The capital of the world had become a target that almost anyone could strike. And so we come at last to the year 476, and to the end. By now, the Western Emperor was little more than a figurehead, a hollow symbol with no real power, propped up by barbarian generals who pulled every string from the shadows. And the very last of them was only a boy, a teenager named Romulus Augustulus. Consider that name for a moment. Romulus, the legendary founder of Rome, Augustus, its first and greatest emperor. The empire that had begun with a Romulus and an Augustus would end with a frightened child who carried both names like a sad and final echo. He barely ruled at all. A Germanic commander named Odoacer simply decided he was finished with the charade. He deposed the boy. He did not even trouble himself to kill him, but sent him quietly away to live in the countryside, and declared himself king of Italy. And then Odoacer did the most chilling thing of all. He took the imperial crown, the very symbol of the Western emperor, and shipped it east to Constantinople. It was a message, plain for all to read. The West no longer needed an emperor at all. And so, with no great battle and no final stand, the Western Roman Empire quietly came to its end. Which brings us to the question that historians still argue over to this very day. Was Rome murdered, or did it take its own life? The first theory is the dramatic one, that the barbarians did it, that wave after wave of invaders battered the empire until at last it shattered, and that Rome fell to the sword. But look a little closer, and the second theory begins to feel far heavier. Because by the year 476, the barbarians were no longer truly outsiders at all. They commanded the army. They ran the government. The very man who ended the empire was a general working from within the Roman system itself. Rome had been hollowed out from the inside for centuries, by its own corruption, its own greed, its own broken money, and its own broken politics. The barbarians did not break down the door. They were already living inside the house. And perhaps the strangest truth of all is this. For most ordinary people, the year 476 did not feel like the end of the world. They woke the next morning and worked the same fields and lived in the same towns they always had. The empire did not die in a single dramatic moment. It faded, so slowly and so quietly that the people living through it scarcely noticed the greatest civilization in history slipping away beneath their feet. But here is the twist that changes everything. Rome never truly died. Its language lived on, becoming Italian and Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Romanian, tongues spoken by more than 1 billion people today. Its laws became the foundation of legal systems all across the world. Its architecture, the arch, the dome, the towering column, still surrounds us. The calendar hanging on your wall is Roman. The months are Roman. Even the very alphabet you are reading right now was carried down to us from Rome. The empire fell, but the idea of it never did. For centuries afterward, nearly every ruler who followed dreamed of bringing it back to life. And so, in 1,000 quiet ways, we are all of us still living in the world that Rome built. So was its fall the greatest tragedy in human history, or simply the longest, slowest transformation the world has ever seen? That, I will leave for you to decide. If this story moved you, do me a small favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to The Animated Past so you never miss what we bring to life next. We have more history on the way very soon. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.